Hello and welcome to the Conversations at the Vessel. We are extremely delighted and honored to have Elisabeth Henderson with us as our guest today. Elisabeth is the director of the Recess College and Leadership Insight Profile, which she founded for her clients in 1988 to offer organizational and personal development experience of leadership change and authenticity. As a lead consultant on major organizational change projects in industry, government, and private sector, she works with political pressures, team and personal dynamics within large-scale organizational change and high-risk projects. As a consultant, she is committed to cross-national training and development. Her career began in social action and later in adult, group, psychotherapy, and organizational dynamics. She trained in LSE and Tavistock Institute, London.
So it's Elisabeth's experience in working with individuals, relationships with other individuals, with communities, as well as organizations, which got us to reach out to her to ask, I think, what are very pertinent questions in these very uncertain times. So thank you very much, Elisabeth, for agreeing to do this with us. We are really delighted.
Thank you.
Well, it's good to be talking with two people. Couldn't be nicer. Love to talk with you. Let's see where we go.
We find that on the one hand, the past few months being locked up inside our homes, normal life as we knew it had come to a standstill. And there was a lot of anxiety and fear about the future, about what would the world look like on the other side of this virus. But on the other hand, this moment seems to be full of potential for pause and silence. So how do we reconcile these two different states of uncertainty, but at the same time, a moment which is full of potential?
That's a very big question. And I think I'd like to tackle it from my own perspective, which is actually working with people's own human experience. And I've been running a lot of groups online, which are dynamic therapeutic groups, and have developed a way of actually working with people online where they declare how they feel as well as what they think. Now, what I've learned are a couple of things. One is, of course, it's a very different situation in the UK to in India. The whole context is different. The government is different. There is very strong influence by citizens on government, and certainly a huge amount of critique that can't be stifled. And my sense is that it's not underground, it's very public. And it has had some real effects on government. But at the personal level, I've noticed some very interesting things. First of all, under lockdown, it really isn't safe to let go completely, to have big reactions, to download and offload what you're feeling on other people. If you do, it gets out of hand very quickly. And of course, in the UK, we have seen violence in homes. But what I actually notice amongst my clients, people in the Recess College, my friends, is there's a sort of personal isolation in which people hold on to what they feel. They will share, but they don't go for the extremes of high or low. I find this quite interesting. And the reason I think is that because everybody is in the same situation, there's nobody in a different state to catch the problem. We've all got to deal with it in this country in a way, on our own. Now, it's easier for people in families, but family dynamics can be the devil at times, as well as wonderful. And what I'm finding is people are having to hold back a little bit, not care less. They care just as much, but part of caring is not offloading onto other people. I think that's important.
Like even at the personal level, what you talked about your friends, where they are maintaining an in-between and not downloading their anxieties onto others or not being overly optimistic or enthusiastic. I think that was also quite wonderful as to how do you find an in-between to negotiate this difficult time.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of people in the sort of middle class, which I'm more in touch with, who have actually loved being at home with their families. But of course, these are the kinds of people who have gardens, who can do barbecues. Yes, they've been isolated, but not unpleasantly. So they haven't been able to do what they usually do, go out and enjoy themselves. But there's been a deepening of relationships for some. Now, I think that's very different for people who are very poor, who have perhaps 1 or 2 rooms, who don't have any outside space, who've been not allowed to go out very much. But I think they are most genuinely suffering. And our problem at the moment is that the government is wanting to ease lockdown as though it's a private government matter to keep people off the streets, instead of something that is actually incumbent on us because of COVID. It's almost as though people are resenting government for having to be careful. And this government doesn't really want to be in that position of being the depriver. It's very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they're in the position of being deprived, and it's very interesting the kind of conversation that happens where people treat them as though it's almost, they can't get it right in what they do because there's always somebody who doesn't want it. Now, I do think that possibly, like your own situation, there's some power grabs going on. Power grabs about dismantling our what I think is the jewel of British society, which is the National Health Service. And all sorts of laws are coming in about being able to tender out of the NHS, when in reality, the real problem for the NHS is that it's been used as a political football by successive Labour and Tory governments. And this is something I find very interesting, a model of government which is central government to local. Now, I don't know if this means anything to you, but in the UK, there are very good local government, very good local hospitals, very good local mechanisms that deliver government and deliver services. What has been really noticeable under COVID is the government that doesn't rate local government and goes directly for bringing in firms or bringing in new organizations to deliver services for COVID, bypassing and often not even talking to local government. Because my own understanding of this government is they understand big organizations and absolutely do not understand small and medium, understand what people can do on the ground to network and make things happen. So it's incredibly top down. Now, alongside that, in this country, there's been a new love for the NHS, for the National Health Service, because so many people, and I don't know if you know this, that the nurses and doctors have been so faithful, and in this country, they have managed COVID. There have never been an excess of people over beds. That is by them dedicating their time, people sleeping round hospitals, not going home for months, people running care homes, going and living in the care homes so they don't bring in the infection. And that dedication has been very moving. And do you know this, that every Thursday for, I think, 10 weeks, people went outside and banged saucepans and shouted and said their love for the NHS. So the NHS has moved from being something that everybody complains about to what people are now calling the hero. And they're seeing it in heroic terms. So I think it's going to be very interesting whether the tactics of making changes without people understanding, the public understanding what's happening, whether that will be so easy. Because in my view, it isn't about privatizing, which is what they want to do. It's about letting the NHS go local and deliver its own services, do its own marketing, do its own structural strategy for what's needed in its area, manage its own systems, not all the time have to constantly give information for central government to monitor them. So I don't, how familiar are you with all this?
Kind of, yes. I mean, we're also familiar with the troubles that NHS was in and how it's now becoming, both because of political reasons as well as how COVID has brought it into the center stage. We are kind of familiar with the NHS. Continuing on this particular issue that you have raised, I think we have one question regarding leadership.
Yeah, where in a crisis, the natural response is to drop everything that we are doing and to respond to it. And the democratic rights of the citizens, they get curtailed, and that's quite understandable. But there's also this tendency of authoritarianism increasing, and I think it is something that we are seeing in also in our context here.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what lessons can you share to help in effective positive leadership at the personal, domestic, organizational, and government levels?
Well, I don't know that I'm the right person to talk about politics and strategy, but one of the things that I've been doing with a group of businessmen, and small and medium businessmen have been given a lot of financial help in the UK, furloughing, giving grants, giving money for people out of work. So it's held the economy together, and that has been very well done. Not always well implemented, but conceptually very well done. But with the emphasis on what large organizations can do, there hasn't been the same understanding of the small businessman. So I've been working alongside a group of businessmen, an international group of small and medium businessmen. And one of the things that I've asked them is if you listen to the press conferences across the world, not just the UK, but across the world, what is it that makes you trust them? What is the quality of leadership that makes you think, it's not easy, but I can go with this person? Or makes you think, I don't believe a word they say? And what that makes you, as a consumer of these press conferences, what that makes you feel like. Now, one of the things that's come up really is that when the emphasis is on impression management by populist leaders across the world, there's a denial of the problem because it doesn't fit in with their grip on people and their grip on people's minds and commitment to them. So if you have a leader that is what I would call a fight leader, I'm for you against them. This is very attractive, and rhetoric is very compelling when you're wanting to do Brexit, or you're wanting to get rid of Mexicans, or you, I don't know what the Brazilian is against, but he's certainly against something. It's very compelling. The problem with impression management is it's actually about the leader, and it's not about the country.
Yeah.
And the real danger of impression management is that there are various things that are completely not in that mentality. And one is, yes, they can do alliances and bargains with other people, but they don't do teamwork. They don't hear opinions they don't want to know about. They don't allow doubt in themselves for somebody to question them. And the other thing that's absolutely consistent, I think, is that with this impression management of being the great hero, the one that can lead the country, there is a almost always seen, always there, quota of carelessness. Therefore, there's a lack of attention to detail and to managing complex detail, where two things that are opposite need to be managed.
Yeah.
So they will go for making out that there's no problem with easing lockdown, as in this country. It's all great news.
Right.
But I'd love to hear more about your situation.
Well, it's not very different, honestly. A lot of things that you talked about, our leadership is not very different, except that I don't think people have much voice. And the way dissent has been crushed over the past few months, it's scary, to be honest.
Yeah.
COVID, no COVID, I think India is going to take a very long time to recover from what it is going through right now in terms of political leadership across the country.
I have an example. The response to COVID in terms of dedicating NHS staff and having them come together differently has been very effective. But because there's a top-down mentality, people have been kept, the staff have been kept, the medical, the nurses, all the support services have been kept in COVID wards, despite the fact that now there's only a trickle, and they're not allowed to go back, say, to cancer care. So what is happening is there are a lot of deaths in cancer care, whilst there are people sitting, fiddling their thumbs in other areas. On the positive side, again, taking it from a client, some people, and this was a client of the Recess College, one person pulled together the cancer networks within several hospitals and has been building them to act as communities. Now, what that means is that instead of simply, in the old way, different hospitals fighting other hospitals, doctors within hospitals competing, she's been able to develop them into communities where the doctors, the nurses can say what they feel, what they care about, what's happened to them. And so the level of personal connection has developed, which also means in a work setting that people compensate for each other. They take over when somebody is down instead of blaming them. And it's a totally different atmosphere round not leadership of the top, but leadership in the middle of organizations.
Very interesting.
Very fascinating. Continuing on this idea of community, and earlier on you had talked about how you're doing a lot of online sessions, working a lot digitally. Although you're not new to it, that's not how you normally work. However, this is the situation in which we are. So the question really is, now that we are forced into this physical distancing and we are forced into this communication across digital platforms, what happens to learning, communities, and communication? Because all three depend a lot on subtleties of exchanging glances, let's say, facial expressions, tonality of voice, temper of sound, gestures, postures. So majority of our communication is actually non-verbal. And now that we are forced into this kind of an interaction over a flat screen, do you think this prolonged socio-physical distancing is going to have some kind of an adverse impact on our relationships?
Well, it could do. Let me say what I'm doing about it, because I find it difficult to generalize. So I'd like to give my insights from what I'm doing rather than talk in general, if that's all right with you. So talking about what we do at the Research College, it is hugely people going through a process, a sculpted process of learning where some of the reactions that block them come from, and also maybe how they could use their full potential. And so people get to very personal things. And when you're talking personal things, you touch somebody's hand, or you hug them when they cry, or you clap when they have something to celebrate. It's very physical. So the Research College immediately was faced with that we couldn't do any of our work. So we lost all our income. That's fun. And we lost what we did. And for a time, we went into some denial. But then I worked out we had to go online. Now, what I've noticed is that immediately on lockdown, people tried to use Zoom or Teams or whatever it is, as though they were simply doing the normal business, but in another medium. No change.
Yes, yes.
And it's not true. It is different.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I've started working on, first of all, in therapy or in our community groups, we get people to check in and say how they feel. And I will not start a meeting before everybody's just said a little about where they are, because there's got to be human contact. Now, with the therapeutic, then you do need to have somebody who knows how to be the leader of the orchestra and says, so Sukhmani, what are you feeling? And how did you hear what he said? So I orchestrate it and link. That works very well where people already have contact with each other. So most of the community groups that I am working with have been meeting for years, every 6 months. And they know each other and they know each other's history. And they also know the growth points. And so they can say that. And because the Recess College allows a real depth of interchange between people, they can continue to do. They will then talk about how awful it is not to be able to hug somebody, but actually they're doing real work and usually say afterwards, I feel hugely refreshed. Now, when you think about business, I think it's slightly different. I think what happens there is that there's been very little thought about how do you deal with the person who's on his own and isolated, who isn't getting any support. How do you deal with the person who dominates and doesn't know they're taking up all the airspace? How do you deal with the people who do their own emails whilst they're supposed to be in a meeting on another screen? And what I'm starting to work on is there are some ways in which I think online work is actually very, very useful. If you're talking about rational decision-making or exchange of information that isn't emotionally loaded, it's very quick and people do it well. The second thing is that it actually takes some of the dynamics out. Somebody said to me, I now say what I think because I'm not feeling menaced by the presence of a bully. Yeah. He may still be there, but I don't feel it because he's just one of the faces, yeah, instead of taking over. There are some issues where there are deep differences between people, and very often those are put as personality differences. So-and-so don't get on, but actually there are differences of values. Yeah. People have a different idea of how things should be managed around here. And what I'm actually advocating, as people can go back to work here in this country, that there is an advantage to doing quite a lot of work online from home for several people if there is space and a place to do it. But what you actually have to have is face-to-face meetings that are dedicated to developing teamwork, right, where people can say what it is that they think, that somebody unearths the unsaid and sometimes the unthought issues. I mean, can you imagine having a long space online where nobody says anything because they're thinking? It's unthinkable. Right. You have to have offline times which can be socially distanced, which are really around team building, working together, coming to agreements, coming to commitments. And that's where we work with handling difficult conversations, how to get two groups or two people to be able to do business with each other because they've agreed how they're going to agree or agreed how they're going to disagree, but how they're going to work, and develop those working contracts, not the job specification, yeah, but the working, the working agreement. And the last thing I want to say is that I think there has to be vigilance, because one of my clients in South Africa is very near the top of the bank, but just below the executive. And what he's saying is that the board seems to be rubbing their hands in glee because they're getting so much work done by people at home. Yeah. What they don't seem to notice is that because people are anxious, during the emergency, they worked, I mean, what my friend was saying was that he was getting emails at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Right.
And emergency cannot continue.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I think that another client of mine was talking about a company where 60% of the workforce want to continue working at home, but the problem of the management is this is okay for working with what's currently needs to be dealt with, but it doesn't develop the people. So I think we've got to have separate strategies for working with development, working with teamwork, in order to use online working well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It actually leads us into this this question, the scenario of work from home, and the household now has become the school, the college, the workplace, the play area, the gym, and a whole lot of unanticipated activity which is going to happen, and everybody is going to be into each other's hair. This amplifies the potential for conflict because the boundaries seem to have collapsed. How do we redraw boundaries in this situation?
Well, I'm not sure I can say much more about that. Because I think that in this country, there is a lot of mental health work going on for people to be able to talk with professionals outside of the home. And I think that's very important. I do think that what has happened here, again, I was talking about the businessmen's group. Now, they would have been a group where my kind of work would be seen as a bit winky-wanky, a bit fluffy. And now they're absolutely fascinated by thinking about how to do things. And they're also, I just recently did something that I might share with you, which was called Mood, Motivation and Management. And I could never have talked about that before. I could never have talked about mood to a group of businessmen. It would have been impossible because their culture is about can do, make it happen, actually constantly demonstrating strength in leadership, where particularly to other businessmen, you cannot share vulnerability or doubt. So what I talked about, shall I tell you this, the model that I used? Because it's very interesting. Have you heard of Elisabeth Kubler-Ross? No. Well, it's quite well known in this country. She was somebody who worked on people's reactions to death and dying. And what I did was work with her model and transpose it, and it'll be on our website for the Recess College shortly. I transposed it to what happens when everything crashes and how you then move to recovery and resilience. So if I were to, here's the shock, and the thing crashes, you have to be at home, you cannot produce, you lose your income, you may lose your career or profession, or people want your services if you're in IT massively, so you're confronted with another shock, which is getting 5 times the amount of business that you expect. Now, what I noticed, and we did, was we went into denial. sort of coming down from the shock. And I think denial has a bad name. You know, you shouldn't go into denial. Actually, I think it's a very important transition. It's too much to bear. And very often what people do in denial, and I've noticed it a lot in this situation, they do something that they've always meant to do that's quite good, but doesn't really deal with the issue. So in the Recess College, we went through all our information retrieval and storage. Definitely needed to be done, but it didn't bring us any money.
It's like a website.
Yes. And in the long run, if you survive, it will have been worth it. I mean, we've set up websites, LinkedIn, a new system of information, lovely stuff, all needed. And then, if you like, as you come down, you hit rock bottom, and that's when people get depressed. And the feeling of depression is usually feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, the energy's flowed out, and you can't see a future and you feel no capability. Now that can last a long or a short time. It's not the same, although people fear it, as being depressed for a long time. Because I would again like to reframe depression, because I think there is a lot of evidence to show it's when you're giving up the old and you haven't found the new. So my depression was, oh, so until there's a vaccine, we can't do any more of our programs. Not possible. And people were saying, do it online. And I hadn't been able to get my head around doing things online. But it was only in that period of 3 days of real flatness, I let go of all that we've spent since 1988, so you do the maths, that we've spent developing the Recess College in its present form. And I started thinking the Recess College model has always been to look at what's happening to us and then work with it as though it's useful for other people. So out of that came quite unique online possibilities. I think you move from that into resilience. Now, people talk about resilience as get up and go. I don't think that's true. I think resilience is the moment where you start to dare to think of the future, letting go the past. Do you get me? It's daring to think, I can't do it now. So what do I do with what I know?
It feels good. It just feels good. The way you talked about resilience, that it's not just about getting up and going.
Because somehow that becomes the pressure, you know, that's what also is something that is happening, where it's suddenly like, okay, so what if there is a pandemic? You can still do your work, you can get on with it, and nothing is going to change. So there's almost this pressure on you that why are you like, you know, taking it slow, and that I also need to get up and get on with life. You know,
false exuberance, and then there is a shuttling between extremities.
That makes sense, because I think our leadership here is doing false exuberance, and the scientists are looking very worried.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that COVID has allowed us is to review what we do and to ask people to come in to be part of the community online and do thinking with us, as well as emotional development. So we're doing a lot of strategic work, and looking at how our consultants can be supported. And instead of it being very often me or one or two people at the, if you like, in the center at the quotes top, it's getting much more democratic, because people can meet from all over the world, certainly all over Europe, get you in somehow. But people can then have an input.
Right.
Yeah.
That is an unexpected benefit.
That's wonderful.
One of my clients who was at the Recess College learned to work with groups. Now, he was a university lecturer, senior lecturer in science and technology. And as a result of the Recess College and the work we do on leadership for younger people, he set up, I don't know how many students, maybe 80, and he couldn't deal with it all on his own. So he asked for second-year student coordinators. So this was set up, it was working very nicely before COVID. And then in March, he was faced with, what on earth do I do? I've got to turn all my lectures onto Zoom. I've got to run everything on Zoom. And the course is creativity in science and technology, which is a huge amount of lab work. And he talked to the student coordinators on Zoom and said, I don't know what to do. So he went into the sort of depressed, emptied out state. So he was working like crazy on doing the online lectures. And of course, the program depends on their credits for lab work. And after a bit, the student coordinator said to him, okay, leave it to us. And he didn't give them permission. He didn't know what they were going to do. So they went to the university lab and stripped it completely. And then they got the students to work in groups, in little cohorts, and gave them, negotiated what lab equipment they needed. And they all did part of the experiment in their bathrooms, in their kitchens, in their bedrooms. And they brought it together, and the coordinators coordinated it and brought it to him. And he said that the work was higher than he'd ever experienced.
Wow, that's lovely.
Wow.
It's a very real and good story, huh?
Fantastic. It connects to what you were talking about, how even Research College is democratizing. And
Yes.
This is the situation where we actually improvise and become creative, because we have to adapt. And not so much about running online classes, but it's about just doing things in a different way. I think that's the whole point.
I think to be more specific, if I can add that, I think it is relying on other people who are junior to you, who know what to do, because he did not know what to do.
Yeah.
And what he showed was, I don't know what to do. Now, that to me is part of new leadership.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
So it includes vulnerability, it includes real realism about the situation, and it includes depending on other people, both for soundings and for action. It's trusting the team, which the impression manager, the great ego, can't do.
Yes.
It is a very different model.
Yes.
So what we did was, and you're invited, we set up online cafes, not to come in groups, but to come and just talk about how things are. And then we're setting up repair shops on resilience, in which we will go and use this model that I'm telling you about. And I also want to offer cafes for clients, including for universities, for foreign students who aren't getting the student experience because it's, you know, either they don't go with the rules or it's different. And there's not much chance for intimacy. So we want to set up cafes in lots of universities to work on how people can really talk about their experience. Because it's whenever you talk about your experience, you start to feel refreshed or held or loved or contained or challenged if you're becoming a drama queen or a victim. Yeah. So the resilience point is where something in you says, I'm going for life. I'm going for a future. I don't know what I'm doing. So we did some terrible things because you don't know what you're doing, so you have to try it out. And the problem is with the logical, less intuitive mind, they want to know that it's well balanced before they start moving. Far more important to start moving and then work out and go to the next stages, which I think are about making plans, bargaining, trying things out before you get to acceptance that you can do something even if it's different from them. I can do something now, it's different from them. Now, I also think that you don't do this once. You do it over and over again, because I don't know what it's going to be like in India, but I know it's going to be at least a year of transition. I mean, this new normal that's being talked about here, it's the normal of transition, not the normal of the future, I don't think. I don't think we know what the future is going to be like, and we should keep an open mind.
It's true. It's very good.
One thing I do think is that the future may be more local.
That's true. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. It was again wonderful.
Okay, Ben. Well, till next time.